Welcome back to the channel Russia in Context. Today, we're going to continue our walk around the Basmanny Raion. If you haven't seen the first part of this video, I highly recommend checking it out. There's a link in the upper right corner. But for now, let's pick up where we left off. One thing that's really nice about this area too is that it still has the tramvai, which does exist in other parts of the city, to be sure. But it is, I feel like it kind of feels like it's slowly disappearing. Obviously it isn't, the tracks are still on the road, but Moscow got rid of all of its trolley buses a number of years ago. And so the public transit that's sort of connected to I got splashed with water. Public transit that's connected to those sort of lines above the street are slowly disappearing. And when you have neighborhoods with tramvais in them, it is still a nice little atmospheric thing. As you can see, we are currently in a place called Basmanny District. Now, this whole territory right here during the Soviet Union was a factory for buses and for repairing buses. Then at the end of the Soviet Union, this real estate just basically became available for a general office space, as was, people just rented it out. It was cheap. It's actually still a fairly common practice in places around Moscow and other cities here in Russia, where you have a lot of these older factories in the city that aren't actually factories anymore, but to do something large scale with them would require a major investment. So it's just sort of cheaper and easier to rent them out as office space. But here, actually, as you can look around, it's quite a kind of stylish, modern little place again. And the reason for that is there was a developer from St. Petersburg who came in a few years ago. This developer from St. Petersburg, he had done similar projects in the past in St. Petersburg, maybe a few other cities, I don't remember. And he basically decided that he was going to do something here. And the idea was basically to create a pedestrian street, right, where you would have small businesses on each side, and then here in the middle you would have a common area. Now the project itself isn't actually done yet. This area that we're standing in right now is supposed to be actually covered with a glass atrium, which would make it more of an all-seasons place, so that these kind of terraced little ledges people would be able to sit out and on and enjoy more in the second half of the year. But and then another parking garage there, kind of on the other side of these buildings. We'll see if it gets finished. I'm assuming that they're still working on it, but currently it doesn't look like anything is happening with it. However, it's a nice little place, quite artsy. We can even see over here somebody managed to build a little snowman with the snow from today. But yeah, definitely would be a lot more alive in the summertime. Probably you would expect some kind of live music out here, a lot more people enjoying the weather, but as it is, now, it's not much to look at right here, but this is actually a very old bell tower, which in and of itself isn't maybe the most interesting thing, but it's actually connected to the Old Believers. Now, the Old Believers were a group of Russian Orthodox, but they were persecuted for their beliefs for a very long time. I'll go into them more in detail in a future video. But regardless, they weren't allowed to openly practice their beliefs here in Russia. And in the late 19th century, there was a merchant who had a home in this area right here. And he was also an Old Believer. And the Old Believers would gather in his home, and they had their little sort of secret church going on. But then, at the beginning of the 20th century, the Tsar announced that there would be sort of religious tolerance in the country, and people could practice religions other than Russian Orthodoxy. They could practice it openly. And so the old believers in this neighborhood gathered together and they built a bell tower. And that's all they built. Now, the bell tower is actually all that's left. The house that was originally here was eventually knocked down, and for whatever reason, they left the bell tower, although it did fall into serious disrepair. But sometime, I think this last year, they actually began renovations. So I would imagine in a year or 2 or 3, who knows how long those things take, there will be a nice, lovely bell tower here, and another preserved piece of history. So behind me here is the Доходный дом крестьянин Frolova, which translates to the revenue house of the peasant Frolov. Now, a revenue house, it was the precursor to what we would just call like an apartment building. You can see here there are multiple floors. Each floor is its own apartment. But the question then becomes, how could a peasant afford to build such a thing? Well, it goes back to, again, the late 19th century, during which point in time, most of the quote-unquote peasants were actually first or second generation merchants. The reason that they didn't change their title had to do with the fact that if they had done so, they would have been taxed at a higher level. So they kept the title peasant. But this building is kind of just very unique. As you can see here, there are stained glass windows in the staircase. It goes all the way up. Can't really notice it right now, but in the evening time, it's quite interesting. Gives it a very interesting look. When I first saw it, I actually thought it was the remnants of an old church. But no, it's a residential home, and to this day, people actually live in it. One family per floor. So we are at the metro, but we're not going to go straight back there. We're actually going to go this way first. And you see across the street here, there's a lot of old buildings. The one that you're looking at right now that doesn't look like it's in the greatest shape is the Городская усадьба Сычева Kalininnik, if I got that correct. I'm pretty sure that's correct. Сычева, I mean, the family and all that stuff is correct, more or less. It was, at one point in time, a hotel. Not sure if it's still operating, but anyway, it is a really nice example of sort of the modernist architectural style from the early 20th century. It could clearly use a little bit of work, but yeah, still quite beautiful. Still a nice example of the mixed architecture of this region.
If we take a closer look at the building, we can see the facade is in dire need of some loving care. A green mesh has been applied to various spots in what is likely an attempt to keep further bits of molding from falling off. But one of the biggest issues is the fact that the city slapped a bus stop right in front of the building, no more than a meter of space in between. This, in effect, is hiding the general state of the former mansion, but as we can see, it increases the amount of litter, graffiti, and advertising glued to the exterior. However, I can't wholly point the finger at the mayor's office, as the building is likely still privately owned, meaning the burden of upkeep is on them. That said, it would be nice if there was a program of making sure that these historic buildings were looked after as well as they ought to be. And seeing as how residents of the city make monthly payments into a general renovation fund, it seems that a fraction of it could be allocated to historical edifices such as this one. That said, if someone out there knows better than me and there is a system like this in place, please let me know in the comments. We're currently walking along Bakuninskaya Ulitsa away from the center in the direction of the 3rd Ring Road. Up ahead, this older-looking metal structure is in fact a modern year-round marketplace. There are dozens of such places like this around the city, which offer a centralized location for citizens of each Moscow region to purchase fresh produce, meats, and dairy products. They also helped to fill a niche left open when Mayor Sergei Sobyanin razed to the ground hundreds of kiosks that sold such goods, in a campaign to clean up the city and make it more presentable. This is the Palati Sherbakova, built in 1773, it's a combination of Baroque and classical architecture, which survived up to Soviet times in pretty good condition, when it served as a beer hall. During the 1980s, however, the local government was making plans for TTK, the massive circular highway that acts as Moscow's third ring. This building was originally slated for demolition, but when this news was made public, people came out in its defense. Historians, university and school students, locals, people from many different backgrounds joined together to protect this building, which has undergone renovation in recent times as well. This story is noteworthy because it's seen as the start of the historical preservation movement here in Moscow. Not far from the Palati Sherpakova on улица Friedricha Engels, we see a row of buildings dating back to the early 19th century. These were all originally the property of various merchants who had their shops located on the first floor while they themselves resided on the second. It certainly made for a short commute. Nowadays, small businesses once again occupy the ground floors, their products oriented to the university demographic of the area, with barbers, coffee joints, and smoke shops. This odd-looking building houses emergency services like firefighters and ambulances, but it's in the neighboring yard where we find something suspicious: a UFO. Have we found the culprit for all those unidentified craft in the skies lately? We're here now in the Немецкий рынок, which translates to the German market. The whole area that we've been walking around in today was known in the past as Немецкая Слобода, which translates as the German quarter. However, historically, this wasn't necessarily a place that only Germans lived in. See, it has to do with the fact that in the Russian language, the word for German, Немец, comes from the word немой. Now, немой nowadays is used for mute, a person who is unable to talk, but historically, немой or Немец was just a person who did not speak Russian. Back in 1652, Tsar Alexey Mikhailovich forced all foreigners who had not converted to Russian Orthodoxy to move to this part of the city. At that point in time, the only people who this rule applied to were mostly English, Scottish, and German officers who were working for the Tsar. Nevertheless, the seeds of this region had been planted. Басманный район, Бауманская, Немецкая Слобода. Неважно, как вы называете эту часть Москвы, она прекрасная по-любому. Жизнь здесь кипит, ее ритм современный, но при этом история сохранилась и в зданиях, и в переулках. Нет здесь ощущения, что это результат какой-то намеренности, что мэрия взяла и решила вложить деньги, чтобы возродить район. Нет, здесь люди живут уже несколько веков подряд, и всегда это было место популярное и самобытное, так же, как сейчас. Поэтому, если хочется увидеть красивый храм, где крестили Пушкина, модные лофты, исторические особняки, или просто как люди стильно живут, сохраняя местную архитектуру, приходите сюда, вы не пожалеете.